all of those issues are distilled in the next conversation we're having with Dr. Muhammed Sagagi, who is Vice Chairman, Presidential Economic Advisory Council. He joins us here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
The first of those reports talked about rising unemployment, rising expenditure, and the staff are the same, and all those things. And then, of course, you also listen to that comment by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. It's quite a lot. And, of course, we distilled all of that conversation in a citizens' dialogue yesterday. First of all, from your perspective, having worked with some state governors in the north and a number of other things like that, what would you say we were dealing with before now? What are we? How is it different from what we're dealing with now?
Well, thank you very much. Before now, you probably are talking about before COVID.
Yeah.
Part of the discussion we had yesterday was on strengthening, the policy options, identifying the policy options to strengthen fiscal governance, which is part of what I think Man is talking about. Because I think FCDO and PAL did recognize the link between fiscal governance and economic resilience. Because the whole idea now is, how do we sustain the momentum, especially after, after COVID? And some of the points we made yesterday were that, oh yes, we should focus on sorting out the current problems, but we should not forget that before COVID, Nigeria has had some challenges.
One of
which is what he talked about.
Jobs. My apologies. One of those challenges. Well, we'll say perhaps the micro issues are the jobs, how it affects the common man. But then there were those macro issues as well.
The macro issues.
Policies of MDAs not working together and all those things.
Yes, yeah.
And those ones were pre-COVID.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So
the main thing, the main constraint, as today is the fiscal system, the revenues that accrue to the government for the funding of budgets, and whether it is at the state or subnational levels or at the federal level. So that was the focus of yesterday's discussion, and I think that is also the worries of many other stakeholders. And so what was clear yesterday, the first presentation made a brilliant review of the efforts of the federal government to tackle that constraint. And it was obvious that yes, the fiscal system is precarious. It's precarious for two reasons. One, because it is small. You remember the emphasis yesterday was, and has always been, that you have only 6 to 8% tax revenue to GDP ratio. But there are other reasons why it is precarious, and that is the character of that revenue. It's uncertain and it's disruptive, and that's precisely because of our dependence on the foreign sector, on the oil sector for revenues. Now, it's important to point this out because the objective is not only to increase the size of the revenue that accrues to the government, but to ensure its stability, ensure that we can predict what comes. But what was also obvious, which I think people should not forget, is that the precarious nature of the revenue, the system that we have, is not only a federal issue. It's also a subnational issue. If the federal government is able to generate 6.8% tax revenue, of GDP, the states are not able to generate more than 1% of nominal GDP. The states are not able to generate up to 10% of IGR to fund their revenues. And all the revenue, all the talk about IGR in this country, 40% of that is collected by one state. Between 35 and 40% of that is collected by one state. And 5 states control about 65% of that. But what is even more scary, as we discussed yesterday, is that 3 geopolitical zones, 3 collect less than 50% of what one other state collects. So, I mean, for the states and for the federal government, that is a binding constraint.
Just one quick question on that, the issue that you just mentioned now. Is it to say that the states are not viable, or they are not creative, or there are things they are doing that they shouldn't be doing?
Well, a combination of many things. And obviously, in terms of fiscal sustainability, you would say that many of the states will not be viable. There are few states that can generate revenue to fund up to 40% of their recurrent expenditure, which really raises the question of fiscal sustainability. There are very few states that can fund even, their personnel cost. So those are the issues, and I think that is why Nigerians are bringing them to the front burner.
Would you agree with those who say that all of these considerations notwithstanding, that we brought this upon ourselves? Because there's no state, many argue, that can say they are not viable. The Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is something that we can go take a look at, tinker with it, and ensure that states, because there are latent revenue potential, huge ones, in all of these states.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the focus, as I always tell people, the focus is not really to blame the states for not doing A, B, C, D. The focus, and which was what we really focused on yesterday, was to what are the policy options, whether for the states or for the federal government. I mean, it's good to discuss what the challenges are, but we made it very clear from the start yesterday that we are here to identify and articulate policy options. How do you strengthen fiscal governance to ensure economic resilience? That's, I think, the thing.
Yeah, so, but having been, advised and, from your wealth of experience, why do you think these decisions are not being taken? Because it will benefit the state and the country by extension.
Well, decisions are being taken. Some states have actually implemented far-reaching reforms. I can tell you...
But they are still limited.
Well, yeah, they are still limited, but that takes us back to the trajectory of Nigeria's economy. We have all, for many years, it's not from 2019 or 2015, or it's not about 15 years ago, it's from many years, from the 70s, we had depended on the oil sector for FX, foreign exchange, for domestic revenues, and for our current account stability. We have always done that for many years. And it's easy for us, whether at the federal level or the state level, to do so. I mean, everybody wants easy money. Everybody wants to live on rent. And once you have that addiction, it is difficult for you to change. But the signs are there that, things have to change.
Is that a kind of reference to what the Vice President said, that, look, maybe it's because the states aren't getting creative and doing the needful because they're always able to come to Abuja?
Absolutely. It's easier for the Commissioner of Finance in State X to take his or her, bag and come to Abuja and, share the revenue and go
so
back.
What then can be done about that? Is there a chance in heaven or wherever that, the federal government or some policy or law could come and say, look, states, raise X amount or you won't get X?
Well, I don't know whether that kind of policy that can, given the nature of the federation that we have. But, I think yesterday we were able to identify a number of steps that need to be taken. To be honest with you, there was nothing extraordinary about what was said. And we made it very clear that, it's a reminder. It's not that we didn't know all those. That, to get out of this, it's important for us to understand that we have to grow our economies. You cannot take something out of nothing. You have got to get the economy growing. And if you look at, the best 10 states in terms of GDP growth, they are also the ones that are the best in terms of internal revenue generation. So it also applies to the federal government that for you to be able to get out to relax this constraint, this revenue constraints, you need to focus on measures that would grow the economy. This is the first thing. I mean, it's not rocket science to understand this. But the second one is also you have to diversify. If you want stability, if you do not want to have disruptive development, you need to diversify. You have to run away from the oil sector.
Well, how difficult is that, Doctor? Because, okay, you are vice chair of the Presidential Advisory Council, and a number of people would wonder, in the first place, how difficult could that be, and then why is it taking so long? But you look at that and a number of other issues when we return from this break. Well, just one second.
Sure.
I want to take a short break and take some messages. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. Dr. Sagagi, so economic diversification is a topic everyone is talking about.
Yeah.
Getting it done, that's another thing. At the federal level, you advise the president and all of that. So one wonders, exactly how difficult can it be?
Well, but, you know, people don't realize how much diversification we have achieved in this country. The economy is more diversified today than it was 10 years ago. It was 5, 6 years ago. The oil sector contributes less than 10%, about 10, 11% to GDP. The non-oil sector contributes about, 90% of GDP. So there is some diversification. But you need to do more, even when you are diversified. You diversify because you want to expand the sources of your revenue, among other things. But you also need to optimize the potentials of those revenues sources that you have. You have so many that, right now that you are not able to explore. I understand there are only about 41 million people in this country who pay taxes. I understand, for instance, that we have some of the lowest tax rates in the world. So even when you identify the sources, you need to be able to widen the tax net. You need to be able to deepen that. And you do that through institutional reforms, which is what I think the Ministry of Finance has been able to implement over time. I mean, we know about the revenue growth initiative that has been implemented by that. That also has to be implemented at the subnational levels, because this is a problem, like I said at the beginning, that is not just confined to the states. You have to identify some low-hanging fruits. Where would I block leakages in the system? Where would I,
that the leakages issue that you mentioned altogether, I mean, it's a question that my colleagues already given me a name about. We haven't blocked, I mean, at that event yesterday, of course, the representative of the Accountant General's office talked about the fact that the Accountant General's office and the Auditor General's office need to work closer. Now, 2 trillion naira is hanging on the 2017 Auditor General's report from an analysis done by SERAP. And if we cascade that across from between 2015 and 2019, we can imagine how much that is. Now, those leakages are there. And from some of the information available, it's something that happens every year. Who is looking at the Auditor General's report to use it as an instrument to block leakages?
Well, by law, the Auditor General is expected to submit his or her report to the National Assembly for scrutiny, and that the National Assembly or the State Assembly, in case of subnational governments, would ask questions, would send, ask questions to the MDAs and take action. So it's clearly there is a process that needs to be followed. I mean, whether it is followed, you heard what the gentleman said from the Office of the Accountant General, that some of these things are not followed. And this is, part of the legislative oversight function of the National Assembly and the state assemblies
Is it a question, is it, my sincere apologies, is it a problem of political will or interests?
Well, it's about, it's about implementing the law. I mean, clearly, you can't blame the executive in this kind of instance. You ask why the National Assembly is not doing its legislative oversight function. Okay? But this is only one of the many other leakages that you have in the system. The fact that you are not able to identify even the several other sources, that in itself, is a problem.
Okay, well, as we wind down now, what do you want to see done, either policy-wise or otherwise, to ensure that we improve upon our situation at the moment, economically?
He asked a question yesterday, the silver bullet. What do you want to do? I don't think I would have one silver bullet, but I would have, a number of things that, and what would be the objective? The objective is to promote this resilience. And we are lucky that in the last quarter, see the growth of the economy, 5%, the best that we have had since 2014. And many of the sectors of the economy also expanded. So this is an opportunity for us to now say, what do you need to do to ensure that this continues? Or two things. What do you need to do to improve the outcomes of this growth? And then to ensure that it continues. Why the outcome? Immediately after the announcement of that by MBS, a lot of people began to ask questions. Okay, so the economy is growing at 5% now. So what is for me? I mean, what happens to jobs? What happens to incomes and poverty? Which is legitimate for people to ask. Not realizing, of course, that there will obviously be a lag. This happens, and then we expect. And sometimes you have to push that to happen. So what do you do to make it more inclusive? What do you do to make the momentum continue? At the previous discussion that we have had, people did mention quite enough, just like what Madam Mansour was saying. You need to have very clear policies as to the direction of the economy. Policies that investors can predict. They can predict policies, they can be certain about what happens. You need to tackle inflation. You need to tackle our foreign exchange problems, which is, what Madam Mansour was talking about. I'm not asking you to fix a foreign exchange rate. I'm only asking that you need to have a process, a management of foreign exchange that tells me, that encourages me to take risk and invest money in the economy. That encourages other people to come and discourages other people to take their money out of the system.
Well, it's an endless conversation.
Well, sure.
It's an endless conversation because, we could go on this one because it's something that puts money in people's pockets or take money out of people's pocket, and it's definitely something that I'm pretty sure that we'll have to bring you back some other time.
Thank you very much.
Take this on.
Thank you.
But Dr. Muhammed Sagagi is Vice Chairman, Presidential Economic Advisory Council. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Sunrise Daily is back for that lecture card they talked about yesterday. Stay with us.